Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. Let's turn to a third idea. This is to replace the personal income tax in the United States with tariff revenue. This is the description of it in a Wall Street Journal news story. Trump floated the idea of an all-tariff federal revenue system large enough to replace the income tax during a morning session with the House GOP, according to a GOP lawmaker in attendance. And it is not quite clear how precisely this would work. The U.S. imports about $4 trillion of goods annually, and the U.S. income tax raises about $2.5 trillion. So if there's no dynamic effect of people changing their behavior, you would take a tariff rate of something like 70% to fill that gap. But of course, when prices go up, people will buy fewer imports. And so maybe you'd be looking at something like a rate of 100%, Kate. And I question whether that is really what Americans want, what voters want, whether their avocados and their bananas at the grocery stores are suddenly going to be 100% more expensive, because that will be revenue that is going in to replace what they would be paying in income taxes.
Sure. I mean, I think the real operative issue here is this going to be replacing the money that they pay in income taxes? Every so often, this debate comes along in tax policy. We should replace the federal income tax with a carbon tax. We should replace the federal income tax with a fair tax, a value-added tax that taxes consumption instead of income. The problem with these debates is that the lived experience of them in other countries that have experimented with value-added tax and other levies is that you get both instead of one or the other. The idea at this point that we are going to repeal the federal income tax, which is highly progressive, and a tariff system would be much more regressive, by which I mean the burden of taxation would fall on different people than it does now. I mean, think about, you'll know better than I, Kyle, but we're above 30% of our federal income taxes are paid by the top 1% of earners. So you would change the tax burden significantly, which Democrats would attack mercilessly. It is perhaps a question, and these academic questions come up if you are creating a de novo tax system, but the U.S. already has a federal income tax. And so I think it is not a serious idea. I think it is trying to juice the idea of tariffs that Trump wants for other reasons, to punish practices he thinks are unfair. We know that tariffs are one of his real fixed economic beliefs that he's held on to over decades. So I would not rate this as a serious proposal to replace the federal income tax. And if it were to ever exist, you just get both. And the last thing I'll say is, when you look at European value-added taxes and sales taxes, they become a way to boil the lobster in the pot by turning it up slowly and without a lot of accountability. And that's what you've seen happen in some of these countries, where they're ratcheted up slowly over time to fund, social spending priorities and such. And I think that's a real concern in the United States, even if you could ever pull off this swap, which I just think is completely unrealistic at this juncture.
Kim, what's your take on this? To the point about you would end up with both tariffs and an income tax, the only way to prevent the income tax from coming back under the next Democratic administration would be a constitutional amendment. And doing a constitutional amendment is very difficult. And I agree. I don't see that happening. I don't see that in the cards here. So maybe Kate is right that this is an effort by Trump testing something out, trying a line to see if he can make the kind of protectionist tariff policies that he wants to do anyway more palatable by promising people that the end result will be a reduction in their income taxes. But I also am skeptical of this just on the economic merits of it. I understand why Trump, as a protectionist, says that if we only had higher tariff barriers, then we could bring some manufacturing jobs maybe back to places like Ohio. And I'm skeptical that that is actually going to work very well in practice, but it's definitely not going to work very well in practice with regard to things like bananas and pineapples. And so the idea that we're going to raise some enormous 100% tariff on every kind of good, I think would be a net loss for consumers, because they'd be paying more for things that we really can't grow or manufacture or get competitively in the United States.
This is an absolutely dreadful idea on so many levels. I mean, Kate was just talking about this question of how tariffs can be viewed as a form of a consumption tax, and that is true. but they are a proxy for a pure consumption tax and one with absolutely devastating economic consequences. We have been down this road before. 100 years ago, it was called Smoot-Hawley, and we imposed tariffs on some 20,000 imported goods. It was an absolute disaster. What it resulted in was endless rounds of tariffs and counter tariffs by countries around the world. It resulted in a reduction in U.S. exports and imports by, I think, more than 60%. And it definitely deepened the Great Depression. This was not an experiment that went well. And the notion that everyone's just kind of forgetting that history is remarkable. We have more recent history. Donald Trump imposed some whopping tariffs while he was in office. And one of the first things that happened were counter tariffs that had very damaging effects on some of our industries in this country, including our farming industry. So it might sound good as a political point because you can hold out the notion that, hey, yay, you can get rid of income taxes, except for that's political fiction, as Kate just described. Nobody's repealing the 16th Amendment anytime soon. And you can't trust Washington as far as you could throw it if they promise you, oh, no, we'll zero out the income tax rate. We promise we won't bring it back. Yeah, right. Go ask any other country that's ever tried that, how good those promises have been by their politicians. So I think this is not just very poor economic policy. It's a dangerous idea to insert into the kind of conscience. My concern about this is that sort of as I was talking about Democrats and their opening bid of a 28% corporate tax rate, I'm more concerned that this is Donald Trump's opening bid for much broader tariffs or a piece of tariffing that he uses as part of these tax negotiations. It might just be on certain industries, et cetera, and it won't be the whole deal, complete turn to tariffs as a system, just on certain industries. And it will seem more palatable because it's not the whole deal. And I just think tariffs, we do not have any good examples of tariffs working. And it's unfortunate that this is continues to be an economic inclination of Donald Trump's.
Thank you, Kim and Kate. Thank you all for listening. You can email us your own tax proposals at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.